Merry Christmas. We're so glad that you are joining us for this Christmas special. And from Aimee and I, we love you, and we're so grateful that you're spending some time of your Christmas day with us. Our worship team has done an incredible job leading us in some Christmas songs. Yeah. We're excited to close out in some music as well. But today's the day that our young kids enjoy the boxes more than the toys, and our older kids enjoy the gift cards more than the presents. And so today's a special day. We're so glad that you're with us. I hope today is also the last day that we watch Christmas movies. I'm tired of watching like marketing executives and music teachers. We watched last night a singer-songwriter. They break down always in some remote town, and there just happens to be a lonely soul who's waiting for Christmas magic. I am done with those, and so I hope today's the last day, in our house at least, that we watch those. But really today is all about the birth of Jesus, and so Pastor Renato read the Christmas story. That's been our tradition with our girls to read Luke chapter 2, and you heard that story. I want to read a couple of verses. We're going to focus for just a few minutes on the Christmas story through the shepherd's eyes. I love the shepherd's perspective. And so here's what we read in Luke chapter 2. It says, "In the same region, shepherds were staying out in the fields and keeping watch at night over their flock. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone round them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, 'Don't be afraid, for look, I proclaim to you good news of great joy that will be for all the people.'"
I love this. Now here we have Mary. This is not her ideal birthplace environment. I don't know about you. Have you ever been to visit a woman who's just had a baby? She wants her family, her close friends to come. She doesn't want some strangers to come visit her in the hospital. But here's Mary. Her birth plan was completely ignored. She's put in a stall where animals are to have her baby. And now the angels go out to invite some strangers, the shepherds. And these shepherds, if you're thinking about your child in the Christmas pageant, wearing a cute little robe, clean, singing songs with their little fake beards, that's not what shepherds were like at this time. Shepherds actually were basically minimum wage workers. They were the lowest of the low. They were relegated to the fields. They didn't spend much time with people. They weren't very clean. And more than that, they were a dishonest group of people. Oftentimes, they would take extra wool from their masters. They would sell some of the lambs that they didn't know about. So there were rules during this time that you should not buy from shepherds because they were known to be dishonest. So this is who is invited to come and worship the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. And I don't think we can find a more unworthy group. But how like us, that God would also consider us and invite us in to worship the King of Kings.
It's amazing when you think about the shepherds. They were entry-level worshipers. I was thinking about this. I started working when I was 17, and I have had 15 jobs in my lifetime. And I was thinking about the most boring job that I've ever had, because I think being a shepherd was a pretty boring job. It was like making sure the sheep don't hurt themselves, that they're eating, that there's nothing attacking them. It's kind of like parenting, I guess, although I don't think parenting is necessarily boring, but it's just kind of a boring job. I want to ask you, what was the most boring job you've ever had?
I was a personal assistant, and I think the main thing I had to do every day, it was an older woman, was just remind her how to get into her emails, and I am telling you, that was boring.
Email is always boring. The most boring job I had was, I worked at a dry cleaners in Bible college, and it was just a storefront where we collected the clothes. There was no cleaning involved, and that was a rough semester because I was in Greek as well, so I was doing my Greek homework at a dry cleaners, and get this, the lady that I worked with always had country music playing, and so that was a rough
blessing.
That was a rough semester. That was not a blessing. That was a boring job. But these shepherds, they were entry level, really boring worshipers, or boring people that God really cared for.
He did. And there is something that we can learn from the shepherds as we consider this gift exchange of turning our ordinary circumstances into something extraordinary. So the first thing we can learn from the shepherds is humility. You see, God makes room for those who have a humble heart. He's able to use people who lay down their own pride, their own, I know what's best, and they come before the Lord in humility. Now, we see the humility in the shepherds through two ways. The very first thing that they did when the angels came is that they listened when God spoke.
That's good.
And I think that we can imagine angels just showing up, and I think that we know we'd be pretty frightened in that moment. But the shepherds chose instead to run away, to stop, and to listen. They didn't allow themselves to be distracted. They didn't decide that they knew what was best. And we're going to read in Luke 2, 9 through 10. Then an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Don't be afraid, for look, I proclaim to you news of the great joy that will be for all people." And we see from the shepherds, they didn't ignore, they did not run away, and they didn't try to refuse to hear what it was that they were hearing the Lord speak, to make it into some illusion. Maybe they had just been out in the fields too often. They chose to listen. And the second thing that we see the shepherds doing is they responded to God immediately. We see this in Luke 2, verse 15, when it says, "When the angels had left them and returned to heaven, the shepherds said to one another, 'Let's go straight to Bethlehem and see what has happened, for the Lord has made known to us.'" You see, they received God's instructions and they acted upon it immediately. They didn't hesitate. They didn't wait until their environment was perfect. They didn't wait until they were perfect. They chose to obey God immediately. And sometimes you and I, we're waiting for our perfect conditions. We're waiting for things to be just right before we can obey God's calling in our life. And I think this Christmas, one of the things God would want us to know is that He wants us to obey Him immediately. Now is the best time. So not only did the shepherds get to see this humility in action, they got to see the King of Kings in the most humble situation ever. They crowded in when there was no room in that small stable for them. They elbowed, I'm sure, to make sure that they could see Jesus and they could worship Him. And that requires something as we continue to look at the shepherds.
You know, it's not just that the shepherds were doing a humble job, they were walking in humility. What a great thing that is when you think about Christmas time. The shepherds not only exercised humility, they were actually walking in boldness. Now, think about this. They were really a common man. They were a common job. There wasn't a lot of education, a lot of experience. They were just out there watching some sheep. But God called them, sent an angel to tell them about the glory of and majesty of Jesus' birth. And what you think about when you think about these men going into the stable was there's not a lot of room. It's not like a private suite at a nice hospital. Mary is not over here. There's just a very small, cramped space. But they exercised boldness in that they kind of elbowed their way in, as Pastor Aimee just said a moment ago, of like really getting in to see. Now think about this. These were common people, and they were really mundane jobs, but they crowded around to see the birth of Jesus, to see Jesus as a baby. But remember, God, when we give God our mundane, He gives us a mission. And so now their mission was not just to watch Jesus as He's there as a baby. Now it's to tell people. And I love what we read it as we continue on in the Christmas story in Luke chapter 2. You see in verse number 17, it says, "After seeing them, they reported the message that they were told about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at the shepherds, what they had said to them." And when you think about the message of today, the message of Christmas, the birth of Jesus, we all need boldness to share this good news to everybody. Now, I don't know about you, but these last few years have been string after string of bad news, bad news, bad news. But this is good news. And I don't know if this has been a rough year for you, a rough season, or a rough few years, or maybe it's just been a rough life. The good news of Jesus' birth brings us boldness that we can respond to Jesus, we can receive His gift, but that we also can share that with Him. Now, I don't know what your job is. Maybe your most boring job is the job you have now, and we won't tell your boss. But let me encourage you that to take that mundane job that you think is not making any difference, that you would turn that into a mission that God has given to you so that you'll have the birth of Jesus to declare to everybody. One of those old songs I love is Go Tell on the Mountain. And you just go out there and you just tell the story on the mountain. And that is what we are called to do as we walk in humility, as we step out in boldness. Now, there might be something that's crowding out some things in your life. You may need to get rid of some things. You may need to throw some things away in your life that is not helpful. But be bold like the shepherds, and God will turn that mundane into a mission.